On this Wednesday night, the fight to control ferocious fires in BC. The military moving in to help, and the weather making conditions even more volatile.
This is a graphic reminder of how climate change is with us.
Why Canada's fire seasons are only getting worse. Central China submerged. Raging floodwaters inundate cities after the heaviest rainfall on record. Plus, negotiations over. WestJet and the federal government end talks about a relief package, what it means for some frustrated customers. And game on! The women of Team Canada take to the field in Tokyo.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in British Columbia, where a growing number of communities are on edge and under threat from fast-moving wildfires. More than 3,000 properties are under evacuation order right now. Another 16,000 are on alert. People have been told to be ready to flee at a moment's notice. And it's not just one part of the province that's affected.
Normally in a fire season, we're not hopping in every corner of the province. This is the situation right now. We're almost hopping in every corner, and with the weather predictions as they are, we have some challenges ahead.
The immediate forecast calls for several more days of hot, dry, windy weather. Bad news for fire crews already dealing with volatile conditions. Teams from New Brunswick and Mexico are headed to BC to help, and the federal government is deploying hundreds of members of the Canadian military. Here's what they'll be dealing with. There are now nearly 300 active fires burning across BC. 95 are out of control. One of the most concerning is the one burning near Oliver and Osoyoos in BC's wine country. Global's Paul Johnson is in Osoyoos tonight tracking that fire for us. Paul, give us a sense of what it's like.
Donna, the Inkameep fire is burning on this mountainside right next to the heart of BC wine country. The blazes are basically scattered in a 30-kilometer long strip from Osoyoos here in the south to Oliver up in the north. Now, check out this video. This was the scene of that mountainside from Osoyoos Tuesday night when we arrived. Some people in Osoyoos were literally going out into their driveways and front yards with lawn chairs to watch that fire, wondering what would happen. So far, a couple of hundred properties have been ordered to evacuate. Hundreds more are on evacuation alert, including some on the outskirts of the town of Oliver. Now, all of this is happening, of course, right at the peak of the summer tourist season. So many of the evacuees are vacationers who had to leave campgrounds. Some of them have been making the best of it. They've relocated to parking lots in Osoyoos. We spoke to some of them. Here's how they described their experience.
When the fires were happening, we didn't like what we saw on Monday night. Our neighbors at the campsite, we made a decision to get out. So we trailered our boats, hooked up everything, got the RVs all hooked up and packed up, and we got out after midnight on Monday.
We're watching, we're hoping that everything's going to be okay. But like I said yesterday, when that wind changes, the fire could be right back here.
So you might be able to hear that chopper in the background for about the past hour or so. It's been working the fire, skimming water from Lake Osoyoos and then dropping it on some of the hot spots. The continuing problem here, not just at this fire, but throughout southern British Columbia, has been really challenging weather conditions. This morning, it was very windy in Osoyoos, but the big problem is these persistent dry conditions and the forecast, which is offering no meaningful rain on the horizon. Donna?
All right, Paul Johnson in Osoyoos, BC, thanks. The military is also deploying to Manitoba to help battle fires in that province. The federal government says up to 120 specially trained personnel will be sent to build fire lines and extinguish hotspots. Nearly 140 active wildfires are burning across Manitoba. The fire situation also remains severe in northwestern Ontario. Yesterday, 81 new forest fires were confirmed. Many were sparked by lightning. Several First Nations in the area have been evacuated. What is happening from Ontario to BC is another reminder of the impact climate change is having on how and where we live. Scientists warn it will only get worse. Eric Sorensen reports on the fire dangers in the years ahead and what can be done to mitigate the risks.
Canada has a quarter of the world's boreal forests, a storehouse of potential fuel for wildfires. It means Canadians are among the most vulnerable to a climate that is warming. British Columbia has only declared 4 states of emergency in its history of fighting wildfires, but 3 have come in the last 5 fire seasons.
This is a graphic reminder of how climate change is with us, not just intermittently, but all the time.
2017 was one of the worst years in BC. More than 1 million hectares burned. 65,000 people were evacuated from their homes. 2018, another province-wide state of emergency. Fires that cost $650 million to suppress. And 2021 saw the town of Lytton incinerated. Again, residents fled. Increased evacuations, a sign of the times.
It used to maybe be fairly rare, but now it's every year there are many. Right now, there's thousands of people out of their homes.
In BC, there have been over 1,100 wildfires in 2021, more than for the entire fire seasons the previous 2 years. In all, 300,000 hectares have burned so far, 3 times the average for this time of year.
We're ending up with larger fires that are more intense. The amount of hectares that burn each year has doubled since the 1970s. And that increasing trend of the area burned is focused in Western Canada and in the north.
British Columbia declared its first state of emergency for wildfires in 2003 when the Okanagan was ravaged by fire. 200 homes in Kelowna were destroyed. And since then, communities have only become bigger. BC's population has grown by 1 million people. More are living in or near forests. An expanding wildland-urban interface will bring greater risks and costs for British Columbians.
We're seeing more people in flammable landscapes. If we just keep doing what we're doing, suppression resources are already overwhelmed. And with climate change, more people living out in burnable areas, it's only going to get worse.
Experts say Canada is a flammable country, built to burn. With population sprawl and climate change intersecting in our forest landscape, Canadians will need new strategies to learn to live with fire. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Extreme weather has also hit central China. Record-setting rainfall there caused devastating flooding, displacing more than 1 million people. As it pulled into the station, people were trapped inside 2 subway cars in Zhengzhou. Terrified passengers watched through a window as water ripped through the tunnel. They spent at least 20 minutes stranded in chest-high, muddy water before they were rescued. At least 12 people didn't make it. Thousands of emergency personnel have been deployed to help rescue those stranded, and people are banding together to try to save each other. The torrent of rain turned roads into rapidly flowing rivers. This woman became stuck while riding her scooter. People tried to use a rope to get her to safety, but she lost her grip. She managed to grab a door handle and desperately tried to hang on, but the water was too powerful. She was swept away until 2 men jumped into the water and were able to save her. Motorists formed human chains as they struggled to get off the road. From Saturday to Tuesday, more than 617 millimeters of rain fell in the central Chinese city. That's nearly as much as its yearly average. Several major rivers burst their banks, and the flooding extended to about a dozen cities. More than 100,000 people have been relocated to safe zones. The rain has started to ease, but much of the region, China's breadbasket, remains underwater. Extreme rainfall like this is becoming more common because of climate change, and it's exacerbated by widespread dam building in China. In Iran, people are taking to the streets angry with the government and a severe water shortage. This is the 6th straight night demonstrations have been held across the country. At least 3 people, including a police officer, have been killed in the unrest. Human rights groups say nearly 5 million Iranians lack access to clean drinking water right now. The country has been facing a prolonged drought and rising temperatures from climate change, and critics say the government's mismanagement of natural resources has worsened the water crisis. Back in this country, plans are underway to search the site of a former residential school in Brantford, Ontario, to determine if unmarked graves exist there. And survivors of the former Mohawk Institute residential school say it should be a criminal investigation. Plans for the search will be announced soon, and survivors want all evidence preserved and protected. 15,000 students attended the school. Many are unaccounted for.
What we know is that the TRC discovered records of at least 54 death records in the 142 years associated with the school. What we don't know is where those little bodies are buried.
The Mohawk Institute opened in 1828. It burned down twice and relocated before closing in 1970. It was one of the longest-running residential schools in Canada. A national summit on anti-Semitism took place in Ottawa today. Government officials and Jewish leaders from across the country took part, but who was left off the invite list caused some consternation. Opposition leaders were not invited to participate, only to listen, including Green Party leader Annamie Paul, the only federal leader who is Jewish.
I'm the first Jewish woman to lead a major federal party in Canada, and I'm only the second Jewish person in the last 45 years. So my perspective matters in this conversation. I am part of the Jewish community. To have it excluded is, again, I believe, a loss for us all.
Among those who did get to speak were Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and former Justice Minister Irwin Cotler, now Canada's special envoy for preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. He proposed a 10-point plan for Canada to follow.
That anti-Semitism cannot be fought, nor can it be won by Jews acting alone. What is needed is a constituency of conscience and action.
No Canadian should ever fear to practice their religion. Of course, good intentions are not enough. We've seen the rise recently in anti-Semitism, but it wasn't zero before.
National discussions on fighting racism and hatred are far from over. A summit on combating the rise of Islamophobia in Canada will be held tomorrow. No cross-border road trips for Canadians just yet. Coming up, the U.S. holds off on returning the favor for fully vaccinated visitors. And the turbulence for air travelers as WestJet opts out of federal aid. The U.S. has extended non-essential travel restrictions at the land border until at least August 21st. The Department of Homeland Security says the threat of COVID-19 transmission remains too high to ease measures. Canada will allow fully vaccinated Americans to travel into this country starting August 9th.
A Canadian citizen can fly into the United States if they're fully vaccinated. Why can't they drive? The immunity is not diminished because you're in a car. This is ridiculous.
Fully vaccinated travelers from other countries will be allowed to enter Canada as of September 7th. Months of negotiations between WestJet and the federal government have ended, and the airline has turned down a federal aid package. Other Canadian airlines have accepted the federal lifeline, including Air Canada. And Gaviola explains why WestJet is going it alone and what it means for customers.
An airline recovery has begun across Canada. Fully vaccinated tourists from the U.S. will be able to start visiting in early August, so WestJet plans to continue ramping up its services, moving beyond the need for a government bailout. A statement by the WestJet Group says, given encouraging vaccination rates across the country, both parties have mutually agreed to shift focus from these negotiations and away from taxpayer-funded support to leading the safe restart of the travel and tourism sector.
It's owned by Jerry Schwartz, one of Canada's most successful business people. It's privately owned, and they don't want to share financial data with the public or indeed with the government.
Schwartz is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Onyx Corporation, which owns WestJet privately, unlike publicly traded companies Air Canada and Transat AT, which cut deals with the federal government. That support came with strings attached, limiting executive compensation. The Air Canada deal included a $500 million equity stake, a long list of potential sticking points in negotiations with WestJet.
We've been loyal to WestJet for so many years. We've always flown with them. And this is the way we're being treated because they want to keep our money. It makes me angry.
That means WestJet customers who've been issued travel vouchers instead of refunds are out of luck.
that for us was extremely frustrating. I was going on mat leave, so, reduced pay. So we could use that money.
The Canadian Transportation Agency has received more than 3,200 pandemic-related complaints about WestJet. Ottawa isn't confirming how many federal dollars WestJet has already received, but in a statement to Global News, it says support for airlines totals more than $2 billion in wage subsidies, plus $1 billion announced in the fall economic statement for airports and smaller airlines. Analysts say, barring another negative turn of events, the worst of the turbulence is behind the industry. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, we hear from a former interpreter for Canadian troops who says he's being hunted by the Taliban. Translators who worked side by side with Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan keep pleading for help. Because they worked with foreign forces, they're considered traitors by some in their country and live in fear of being attacked or killed by the Taliban. The federal government knows lives are hanging in the balance. Mike Armstrong reached one man who says the Taliban are searching for him.
The Afghan military has been losing ground for weeks. When it does, the Taliban moves in. As they do, they have targets.
Yeah, I was in a bad place.
We spoke to a former Afghan interpreter who worked with Canadian troops in 2010 and 2011. Last week, he was in a town outside Kandahar. We're protecting his identity. He says the Taliban was after him.
They already have information about the people who work with coalition forces or NATO. When they enter to the city, they were going directly to the house home and take out him from the home, and they kill in front of their parents and of their families.
Now, that interpreter's been moved with his wife and daughter. Where exactly, we've been asked not to say, only that it's a safer place and a location that'll make it easier to get them out of the country eventually. But that family is one of close to 24 being helped by a group of retired Canadian soldiers. They've been organizing, fundraising, and calling in favors to help people who used to work with them.
We are not going to quit.
Retired Corporal Robin Rickards is part of the network. He says he's been living on 3 hours of sleep for days, and he's lost track of how many people have jumped in with support.
There's lots of people pitching in where they can and doing what they're able to.
Now, there is frustration with the federal government. While Ottawa has said it's working on a plan, that's about all it's said. There's no word on who'd qualify, and there's no timeline.
These are people who believed in Canada.
One voice speaking out on the issue is Catherine Rusk. She is the sister of Captain Nicola Goddard, Canada's first female soldier to be killed in combat. Rusk says her sister's interpreter is still in Afghanistan.
I don't think Canadians are okay with it. I don't think Canadians are okay with leaving the people who've helped us behind.
Now, a potential airlift would likely be out of Kabul, but there was a sign this week the capital is getting less and less safe. These were rockets landing near the presidential palace during prayers Tuesday. With each day that passes, there is an increasing urgency to get interpreters out. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Next, the women to watch as Canada competes in an Olympics like no other. It's official. Brisbane, Australia will host the 2032 Summer Olympic Games. It is the first city to win a summer bid under a new selection process. The IOC overhauled the process in 2019 to discourage cities from competing against each other in expensive bidding wars. And competition is underway at the Tokyo Games. Team Canada is starting on the right foot. Our softball team clinched a shutout win in their opening round, led by a pitcher who 3 years ago wasn't sure she'd live to see these games. Crystal Gamansing reports.
Health concerns have plagued the Tokyo 2020 Games, but Sarah Groenewegen proved she is in top form, clinching a shutout victory in the team's tournament debut after battling back from a near-death experience with Legionnaire's disease. The win all the sweeter as softball just returned to the Games for the first time in 13 years.
We've got a wonderful mix of youth and experience, a great chemistry, a championship culture. women who are highly committed to their craft, and we're going to win a gold medal. And whether that happens or not remains to be seen, but that's our intention.
1, 2, 3, Canadian women are also once again leaving their mark on the pitch. The women's soccer team is striving to medal in its third consecutive Olympics. 6 minutes in, Christine Sinclair put Canada on the board. This was her 187th goal in international competition. Then came a heart-stopping moment. Canada's keeper, Edmonton's Stephanie Lebay, clearly in pain but unwilling to leave the match. Her dedication and skill shone through. There were no fans in the stadium, but odds are any Canadian watching let out a cheer with that save. Lebay did ultimately leave the match, and Japan would later tie it up for a 1-1 draw. The Sapporo Dome was also the site of the first political statements of the Games. Soccer players from Team Great Britain, New Zealand, and others took a knee before their matches. Players had been told such symbolic gestures would be prohibited at these Games, but when asked, the IOC president softened that stance.
It is allowed. It's no violation of the Rule 50. This is expressively what has been mentioned in these guidelines.
Thomas Bach also found himself defending COVID-19 protocols and protections. There are now more than 75 COVID-19 infections among athletes and accredited Games personnel. Tokyo recorded its highest daily case count in 6 months, with more than 1,800 new infections. A reminder of the unrelenting realities of this pandemic and the backdrop of the most unusual Olympics. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is the Victorian row houses known as Jellybean Row in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.